Welcome everyone to the ISM Rochester May Lunch and Learn webinar. We're so excited that you can join us today. I do want to mention that our next membership meeting will be on next week, May 13th. It's going to be at noon again on the topic of strategies for negotiating contracts with our speaker, Leslie Morell. She's an attorney. So please register today for this important program. Please be sure to ask questions today using the chat or the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, as we would like this to be an interactive program, as always. I am pleased to welcome back Tom Cook, our speaker for today, who is the CEO and Managing Director of Blue Tiger International, a premier international business consulting company on supply chain management, trade compliance, purchasing, global trade, and logistics. Tom was the former CEO of American River International in New York and Apex Global Logistics Supply Chain Operation in Los Angeles. He is a member of the New York District Export Council, sits on the board of numerous corporations, and is considered a leader in the business verticals he works in. Tom is also the director of the National Institute of World Trade. Tom has spoken for many ISM chapters, and I'd like to turn the program over to Tom Cook.
Okay. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Leo, very much, and welcome to everybody who's joined us. So we're going to be talking about the issues involved in managing personnel and working from home. And I'll start out with the context is that we started in our organization back in the mid-1990s to having people work remotely. So we've gone through a long learning curve of how to successfully manage them. And then in 2013, we went completely remotely with our whole organization. So prior to this COVID event, we've actually been doing this now for quite a long time and have a lot of history with it and experience. And that's kind of the basis of what I'm going to share with you, in addition to all the other information that's out there and available today since COVID hit us the early part of last year. So as Kathy mentioned, we welcome any questions or comments on any of the things we're talking about. You're welcome to do that during the presentation. It'll make it more interesting and more interactive if you go that way. Or you can wait to the end, that's up to you. So I want to especially thank Kathy for setting this event up and all the work that she does in setting these things up. There's a lot of work that goes into the coordination and setting up the whole circumstance for this to happen, and we appreciate that. And then in my office, I have Lindsay Dinney, who does that work for me on my side as well. So as Kathy mentioned, I'm involved in global supply chain, but we also have a whole side of our business that's in general management consulting. And that's kind of where this presentation lies, which is where we help companies just in any aspect of their responsibilities in managing their operation and managing their people. So what we tend to do with this kind of presentation is we frame the issues. We kind of outline the challenges that many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. We view it both from a person's, the employee side of the equation, as well as from the management perspective. And we've actually been able to collect a significant amount of data towards the end of last year, and as we've gone through 2021 as well, because a lot of universities and a lot of trade associations and a lot of management organizations have actually started to collect a lot of data about this because of the impact that it has on business models all over the United States as well as all over the world. So as we enter into May of 2021, there's a general sensibility that we're defeating the COVID. The numbers are down. I read something this morning that we're at a 7-month low with the number of cases being reported. And the general sense is we're getting back to normal, both in our social and our business world. But recognize that for the next year, there will be a residual impact on all business models. And most people are even thinking that's going to continue into the first and second quarter of 2022. So there are a number of things that become what we refer to as unintended consequences of the pandemic that impact people working from home. And appreciate that people's sensibilities are very different depending upon who they are We know people, all of us, that are handling this very cautiously and very in an extreme way of making sure that they're being protected, them and their family and their assets. And then there are people on the other extreme who basically don't even believe that it's really a serious issue. And then there's everybody in between. And I make this point because we need to be sensitive as people in business and as managers, to be sensitive to the fact that people feel differently about this whole pandemic and the impact from working from home. Appreciate that children, school, and childcare come into this equation pretty dramatically. Unemployment comes into the factor here, and unemployment comes in a number of different ways, but one of the biggest impacts is that the government has been subsidizing unemployment now for over a year and a half, and it's really caused a lot of small businesses a lot of difficulty in bringing people back because they're making enough money to survive just through unemployment, and they're not having to work. So this is a major issue, and if you're paying attention to the news, it's almost being discussed on every channel, at every station, and every one of their news outlets. Appreciate the fact that we've had also a significant amount of civil unrest as a result of the pandemic because it's been politicized. Um, the government intervention has changed throughout the process. Their position of whether you're talking to the White House, you're talking to the CDC, or you're talking to state CDCs or other authorities, everybody has different opinions and so forth, and it's very not clear as to who we should be following. And we also know that it's a moving target. It's changing all the time. And for those of us who work with companies that have a global footprint, appreciate the fact that the world is impacted by this as well. There is now not a country anywhere in the world that hasn't been impacted. And in some countries of the world, particularly too right now, India and Brazil, they're seeing their numbers increase dramatically. And it is impacting not only their social world that they live in, but also the business world. For a lot of US companies, as an example, that source out of India, there are significant delays now because the manufacturing locations are closed. But even if the manufacturing is open, the ability to move it from the origin point to the outbound gateway, whether it be a port or an airport, that's becoming very difficult. And appreciate that when we have circumstances like we have here that most of us haven't faced before, people's behavior can go from the extreme of being absolutely spectacularly responsible to the other extreme, which is being spectacularly irresponsible and so forth. So those kind of the things that we frame out as some of the challenges. Other issues that we want to think about as well is the impact on our business as well. In some cases, some companies have lost a significant amount of revenue and number of clients. The impact has been horrific. In other cases, the business model has grown significantly. It depends on where you are. Obviously, if you're in the service industry relative to travel, that the industry is down dramatically. So if you're involved with a hotel, if you're involved with the airlines, the road system and so forth, those are the things that are down. But most other business verticals are doing reasonably well. And in some business verticals, they're doing better than they've ever done in their business careers. So it's all over the place. But the general knowledge that we have about the business is that the economy is growing by over 6% now. And it's anticipated by most of the experts. I listened to the Federal Reserve Chairman on 60 Minutes about 2 weeks ago, that they're very bullish on the economy and they're anticipating continual steady growth in excess of 6% all the way through to the end of 2022. We have the business response, and obviously all businesses have responded individually with customized solutions for the specifics of their operation. We know that the government is involved both at the federal, state, and local level, and that sometimes causes a lot of additional resource to us, and in some cases it causes additional hardship depending upon the circumstance. Then we have the individual employees who are working with us and for us and around us, and their individual response, which has an impact. And the whole concept about working from home. As I mentioned before, my company's been doing it since the mid 1990s, and we went completely from home 2013. So for us, it's been something we've gotten used to, and we've adapted to it, and we've learned how to navigate the challenges with it. But appreciate the fact that some people just picked up on it in March and April and May of last year, and they're still going through a learning curve of how best to deal with that circumstance. We have to just ask the question about working from home for ourselves and for our colleagues is, how do we feel about it? Is it temporary? Until when? When are companies going to open up? And I have a pretty broad reach across the United States in terms of our client contact and different agencies and authorities and associations of companies that we work with. And it's really a very mixed bag depending upon where you're located in the United States. I would say generally that along the coastlines, that's a much more conservative approach to the timelines of opening up as compared to the central parts of the United States, which seems to be a little bit more liberal. We're also hearing with some companies that the model working from home seems to be working well. It has not unfavorably impacted their business model, and a lot of them are going to create permanent models of people working from home. Some of the largest corporations, such as Apple and Microsoft, Google, and so forth, those are companies that have announced that in certain silos in their organizations, they actually are going to have people now working from home permanently. But what we're finding out, generally speaking, is that most companies are creating hybrid models in which there'll be people working from home a certain amount of time during the week and a certain amount of time being required to be in the office. So we're really seeing that the hybrid model is kind of taking over in most companies all around the country. Some of the personnel challenges that we really look at, we want to think about is particularly from working home, is there enough space? I mean, some people live in very large homes and they already have existing offices, or they can easily put one together. Others work in apartments and condominiums and so forth. And so space has been a major issue. And it's important for people to have independent, identified, segregated space to do their work in. Many of us have children or grandchildren who are working from home, and that creates an impact into the business model and to our challenges. Many of us have pets and so forth. I have 3 dogs and a cat, and before I can do a webinar like this, though I have my own office, I have to put them in as far away from me as possible and in a secured location so that if they bark, we don't hear it. A lot of us have spouses, right? And some of those spouses are also working from home. And in some cases, that's really good news. And in some cases, as you can see, it's an issue or a problem. Then the big question about effectiveness, and I'm going to share with you some statistics that we were able to get on the effectiveness. And that's a questionable thing right now with most businesses. And again, the question of how long this is going to take. For those of you that are listening to the media, and particularly in the metropolitan area where most of us are based in terms of being in the New York, New England, middle Atlantic state areas, we're learning that our governments, particularly at the state and county levels, are trying to move things a lot faster now than they were even as much as 2 months ago. So this rate of things opening up and things normalizing is increasing every day, which in some cases is probably very good news. We have access to a number of resources for information and so forth. And we did our own survey in conjunction with one of the trade associations that we do a lot of work for. And we asked 4 questions. And we did this last year, around September of last year, and then we just did it again. For those of you who may have participated in another speaking event like this that we did, some of the information has changed from the first one we did to the second one. So the question that we asked, and we asked it both of employees and also of managers, was, are you effective working from home as compared to working from the office? And the employee side, 60 to 70% indicated that they felt that it was working reasonably successful and that they were as effective as they were in the office, as compared to about 30% who didn't think that. But the opposite was clear on the management side. Management overwhelmingly, as much as 80 to 85%, felt as though that the employees were not as effective as working from home, and they felt that the challenges inhibited their ability to be as effective as they could be. The greatest challenge from working from home happened to be the amount of intrusions that occurred during the day. Um, and the fact is of time management, mainly because of a lot of those intrusions, were the biggest problems for people. From the management standpoint, the biggest challenge was the ability to communicate quickly, timely, and comprehensively was how it was articulated and put. Going forward, would you prefer to work from home? This was split down the middle for the employees, 50-50. On the management side, it was 90-10, 90% wanting the people to come back to the office, and about 10% wanted to leave it where people could work from home or some hybrid model. So as we move into 2021, as this hybrid model kind of is being utilized, I believe that the hybrid model personally is being used as a transition model to go between where people are completely working from home to where they'll work from home and work from the office. But eventually, I believe that the model will go back to where it was, which is the requirement that most people come back to the office. One of the things that I have always felt is that the ability for people to interface with each other, the socialization aspect, as well as the business aspect of things being more openly shared and viewed, easier to mentor and coach and so forth when people are all in the same space. I think those are going to be the driving factors that cause that to move in that direction. Keep in mind the differences reaching out and handling the pandemic regionally, by state and local, and also in the world. Again, for those of us who are working for companies with a global footprint, appreciate the fact that we're impacted by what goes on in other places around the world. So how quickly they recover, how quickly they inoculate. As most of us pay in the news, is that the president is trying to get 70% of the population inoculated by July 4th. In some countries, they haven't gotten more than 5% of their population inoculated. So this pandemic will continue to be a problem, even though it may be resolved as a crisis issue here in the United States this year. It may take the rest of the world all through 2022 and maybe even into 2023 before they get completely inoculated and deal with the problem as effectively as we have. Keep in mind the old adage that we cannot control what happens to us, but we control how we respond to it. So the question about working from home, is it going to become a choice, or is it going to be something that actually is going to be mandated? And that obviously will be handled case by case and company by company. There's a lot of risks that we've identified and have come out over the last year, starting with the exposed vulnerabilities that people have. And I'll just give you an example of vulnerability and liability. Is if you were working in an office and you were walking from, let's say, your office or your desk to the conference room, and somebody swung out a chair and you trip and you fell, that's a workers' comp claim, and any of the costs associated with your health care or your well-being is taken care of under the workers' comp laws in that state. But what happens if you got up from your desk, which is in your bedroom, and you were walking to the bathroom and you tripped, and it's in the middle of the workday at 11 o'clock in the morning? Is that now considered a workers' comp claim? And I ask that as a question mark because there hasn't been enough court precedents to give you an answer of whether it is or it isn't. And it's now being tested for the first time as people have gotten hurt in these circumstances. And we're seeing how insurance companies are responding, and we're seeing how state laws are coming into impact. And eventually, and when I say eventually, it's probably not going to be for maybe 2 or 3 years down the road that we're going to figure out how these things are actually being handled. But they certainly need to be discussed, and ways to figure out how to deal with these things proactively. Additional costs involved with people working from home. If you're all sharing a copy machine in the office, and now there are 20 of those people sharing a copy machine are now working from home, how are they making copies? So a lot of companies have had to beef up equipment purchases for the people working from home, the ability for them to have better internet connections, to have scanning devices and all kinds of things to help them do it. Even some companies are involved in helping them get a desk at an office set up because it's likely to happen for a much longer period of time. A lot of companies as well have lost revenue, margin, and opportunity for growth. A lot of companies that have sales people that go and make visits, and those visits have gone awry. Haven't had the greatest amount of success by trying to sell over the phone and the internet. And the big question that we all ask ourselves individually, but also appreciate that business management is asking this question: are we really truly performing to our best, or is it really just a level of adequacy that's actually being accomplished? So what are some of the pros and cons that we have? I have more time, more freedom, better interface with personnel responsibilities. And I have the same thing as cons because it depends how you look at it. Having more time because you're not traveling to and from work, it depends how you use that time. If you use that time more effectively, then it's obviously a pro. If you use the time ineffectively and you sleep longer, okay, as an example, that might be a negative. It depends. Having more freedom because you're not being particularly supervised or you're not supervising, depending upon whether you're an employee or a manager, that has a double-edged sword as well. And the better interface with personal responsibilities. Obviously, for those of us working from home, it's very easy to go run to the cleaners, pick up somebody at school, run an errand during the middle of the day because everything is close by. But at the same time, there are lots of cases documented where people kind of take advantage of that circumstance as well. So we have to look at this thing from a number of different perspectives. Additionally, clearly for a company, if they start to reduce their brick and mortar, which is one of the reasons that in my company we decided to move everybody remotely, was it reduced our overhead costs for our company, and that made us more competitive in our selling price to our clients. More daily time committed to work than traveling. Appreciate the fact, particularly in the metropolitan areas, commuting time could be 2 hours in each direction. So you're picking up almost 4 hours a day of better time, better use of time. Allows for better family time because our children are home and we're home, and it allows us to be better fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters and so forth like that. However, we have those increased in exposures. I'm going to talk about cybersecurity in a moment as one of those exposures. The question about employee and management effectiveness. Are we losing the impact of team camaraderie because we're not all together in the same space? And our ability, because travel has been significantly restricted, the external interfaces clearly have gone away. And we've had to create relationships on Zoom meetings or WebExes or Microsoft Teams, which generally don't work as well as eyeball to eyeball. So we have an East Coast-based distributor, products distributor, and I wanted to share the two particular cases with them. The East Coast-based building products distributor, they felt a need that all their people would be considered essential workers because of the nature of what they were selling and the services they were offering to their customers. And they felt that everybody needed to be in the office. And they early on in March and April of last year forced their hand in making sure that everybody was going to be at the office working. But their problem was that they only provided the very minimum levels of protection. So they only required people to wear masks when they were moving in open spaces. And they built making sure that there was at least a 6-foot space between people's desks in some of the open areas. As a result, a number of people got sick in their office, and it spread pretty quickly through the office. There was a death among one of the employees, and a number of people got very sick where one of them still has some disability attached to the post-COVID circumstance. And they've actually created a class action suit, the employees, against the employer for not giving the maximum amount of protections. An example would be taking people's temperature before they came into the office, having them to have weekly requirements to take COVID exams and testing and so forth. That the fact is that they had them wear masks only when they were moving from one spot to another, having them wear masks all the time, and things like that. So they identified actually about 9 different things that the company could have done, and they're suing on the basis that they took the shortcuts and only provide minimum level of protection. And we'll see where that case goes, but the general sensibility is that this company's got probably about a $20 million problem in their heads. On the other side of the equation, we have a West Coast-based camp and supply company, and they went the other direction, which is to recognize that people are going to work from home, and that's where they should be. And they created a financial stipend for each individual of $2,500. Meaning they gave each individual $2,500 to buy a desk, to upgrade their internet, to buy equipment for the office space, and to give them some segregation, and to make themselves work more successfully in that home environment. We were involved with this particular company, and we actually had them build team meetings every morning at 9 a.m. So they continued the camaraderie, lots of different projects and stuff. We'll talk about that in a few moments and so forth. And this company out in California has actually been very successful in this, working from home model, because they're doing almost everything they possibly can do to make that work. And appreciate the concept of furloughs, of people, who are given time off to accommodate the downside of some company circumstances, and appreciate the fact that there is both a forced furlough where you don't have a choice, and then there are ones where you're given options and so forth. Obviously, for the employee's side of the thing, options is a much better circumstance. So some of the expectations that we want to be concerned about for the balance of this year and into the first quarter of 2022. What's the intentions of our company? Is it going to be to continue to work remotely? Is it going to be on site or some hybrid model? Appreciate the fact that still in business, even though a lot of circumstances have been successfully moved, is that we still have a high degree of uncertainty in our planning purposes, and particularly for those of us in supply chain, in terms of making purchasing, it's pretty difficult now at this point in time as to understanding what our demand requirements are, so that we can make sure that we're actually ordering the right amount of supply. So that creates a difficulty in planning, and it creates tentative decision-making among that uncertainty. So some of the suggestions that we put forth relevant to this uncertainty is to take a conservative approach to risk. We found even in the short term, companies that have taken an aggressive approach to risk through this pandemic, those have been more aggressive and liberal, have run into issues as compared to those that have taken a more conservative approach. We dramatically recommend communicating robustly in all directions. We're talking about internally, externally, and up and down in the organization. We need to learn to anticipate better, and that means we have to have time to evaluate correctly. We have to have significant and robust information flows, and we have to do, SWOT analysis, which is standing for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We have to do those in our decision-making process. And we found that collaboration over independent decision-making will get a better result than people making decisions individually or by themselves. Other things to think about is time management and trying to manage our time more effectively, taking on the fact that if we're working from home, that we have a lot more personal circumstances that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. We also make the recommendation that you treat going to your desk or your workspace in your house as like going to the office, meaning you get up, you brush your teeth, you comb your hair, you clean yourself up and address yourself somewhat appropriately, rather than rolling out of bed in your pajamas, and never even heading to the bathroom and going right to your desk. Um, Outreaches to colleagues periodically, the water cooler from afar. Pick up the phone, get involved in various aspects of the business, create an office at a very distinct space. It's very important. Talk to your boss or bosses often, ask lots of questions. You want to know what's going on, what decisions are they making. Try to socialize responsibly. We've been doing that in our organization since the pandemic started. So we found places that coffee shops or luncheonette places or restaurants that have a limited capacity, have areas that we can meet privately, as spaces that you can meet one-on-one, and kind of allow you to still have some ability to socialize, but be in a safe environment, and particularly ones in which all their employees are wearing masks and gloves and operating with safe distances involved. Um, you want to try to minimize whatever the distractions are, particularly when you're working home, where there generally will be lots of distractions. You need to exercise patience, but be persistent where there are areas of concerns. You don't want problem areas to go on too much longer before they get addressed. So other things that we think about here is communicating successfully, making sure that they perform, meaning the people that work around you, with you, for you, keeping them actively engaged, try to minimize potential distractions, disruptions, and personal activity, and appreciate the fact of the sensibilities of what they are, you and management really doing. So other things that we want to think about, the liabilities that are associated with people working from home, that we recognize that it's unfertile ground. There are very little legal precedences. They're just being addressed as we speak now. The rules of engagement for people working from home are not necessarily established, okay, but need to be established, particularly if it's going to be a more long-term solution for your company. The rules of engagement, time management, and performance value for the company spend are all issues that we need to integrate into our thought process. We also need to think about COVID testing mandates. And one of the challenges is that, can you as a company mandate to your employees that they take COVID tests? Can you mandate that they are vaccinated, right? This is something that is unfertile ground that hasn't been tested. I've seen some companies that take positions that they're not concerned with how it's going to be handled legally. They believe that it's a moral and ethical issue that they mandate that if somebody's going to be coming into the workspace, not only employees, but suppliers and vendors, service companies, contractors, and so forth, that unless they're immunized, they're not going to be allowed into the facility. Now, whether they can legally do that or not, that's what remains to be seen. But some companies feel as though they're protecting themselves and their staff. That's what they're going to do. For people that continue to work from home, how do they get compensated? Is working from home such a benefit to them that they could be paid less? Or are they working from home such an inconvenience that they need to be making more money? Something that needs to be looked at, and it's generally done by a case-by-case basis. The setup that a person needs to work at home, is that their cost or is it the company's responsibility? And understanding these liabilities that I kind of talked a few of them about, and making sure that we have a risk management mindset in dealing with these potential liabilities. I mentioned about keeping personnel engaged. We're a big proponent of team assignments where even though people are not working in the same space, that you would have them as a team work on things. So on a daily basis, they're communicating with each other, they're sharing responsibilities, and they're moving together as a group rather than as an individual. We're very big on daily, weekly, and monthly meetings. When before the COVID, we had a weekly meeting with our people who work remotely, which was everybody. Okay. When COVID hit, because of the circumstances, we met on a daily basis at 8:30 every morning. Okay, we've now relaxed that back to the weekly meetings, but I would never go longer than a month. I like daily or weekly. The office decorum, office setup, the attire, the general business acumen being used when persons in their space, and making sure that they have the necessary equipment, the internet connections, and the access to the resources that they have in their office. For responsibility and accountability, weekly and summer reports of activity. We've been doing this since the 90s, and when we went completely remote in 2013. Our people who work for us have to provide a weekly report. It's due by Monday morning. Most people get it to us by Friday evening, but it's a report of all their activity, the things that they did all week long, and a status of those things. It's a very simplified Excel spreadsheet that we move between ourselves in a Microsoft Teams format. Clearly, responsibility and accountability is to understand what the deliverables are, and make sure that the job descriptions of people that you have, if it's changed because they're working from home, then it needs to be updated to accommodate that. Making sure what you are aware of at the home and office, that the work atmosphere, meaning that if you're managing people that are working remotely, you need to make sure that the atmosphere that they're working in is conducive to them being able to get their job done. Anticipate disruptive events. It's going to happen if you're going to work from home. Just as a funny note, but I tell a story where I was given a presentation like this in the mid part of last year, and my office is in the front of my home where my driveway is, and I actually had a police car in the middle of my presentation come into my driveway with the lights flashing, and I was the only one home at the time, was knocking at my door, and I had to actually leave the webinar to answer the door. Fortunately or unfortunately, he had the wrong house, and it was a different address that he was actually looking for, so I was able to move him along pretty quickly, but I had to leave the meeting and excuse myself for a moment. A more robust conscientiousness of personal circumstances, the rules about business versus personal. For those of us that have been in business for a long time, and for those of us that have just started, this has always come up as an issue. You know, when is something business and when is something personal? But when you have people now, to the extent that they are working from home in this circumstances, this is now, the lines are even more unclear than they were previously. The office and the home have now merged. Responsibility and accountability, team and individual-based guidelines, and most must be tightly controlled with various degrees of tolerance and patience engaged in. Leadership and management has to start to rise in this circumstance because of all these challenges. We need to make sure that we're instilling and inspiring vision, getting the important things done, and instilling good operational processes that are conscious of the fact that people are not working on site and working remotely. We need to make sure that the people working off site are effective. They're involved in team participation, they're communicating timely, and that we're managing and setting up lines of accountability and responsibility. Appreciate that now more and more communications are done electronically, such as this webinar that we're involved with. Most of us are involved not only in participating in these events, but a lot of them are leading these events. So we need to make sure that our presentation skills are sharp. We need to get familiar with Zoom, WebEx, Microsoft Teams, and other software that's involved in providing these venues. We need to make sure that our communication strategies internally and externally are set up, and that we now are going away from the visual and we're more involved in our vocal presentation. So we need to start to master that skill set. A company with all its people working from their desks, it's much easier to protect from cybersecurity risks. You now have, I have a client that's actually in New Jersey. They have a facility upstate New York out of Albany. And between the two facilities, they have 1,500 people. They have now 1,500 people working from home. That means the cybersecurity threat is now over 1,500 different locations. Okay, is your cybersecurity protections in place to cover those 1,500 locations? The rules that your IT people operate in the office similar to the ones that your personnel that are working from home are using. So these are things that you need to be thinking through, not necessarily yourselves individually, but you need to make sure your company is thinking through, because there are a lot of examples now where companies are getting hacked, not from their office, but through the homes of their employees. There are a lot of bad guys out there, and they're taking advantage of all this chaos. Appreciate the fact that cyber risks have grown over 1,000% in 2020. The words of phishing, remote theft, ransomware, disruptionware, cyber theft, firewall protections, mostly impacting small companies, individuals, as well as public entities, are all critical issues. Point being, you need to make sure that your company is providing cybersecurity protection for you at your home. Other things to think about remotely: the weekly, monthly reviews, meaning you're reviewing the people that you're working with and the activity on a regular basis. You need to, even in the face of the negativeness of this pandemic, you need to be positive, realistic, and upbeat. You need to be open, honest, transparent. Transparent is a big word, okay? And forthright. And appreciate visual contact and on-site meetings when appropriate. In all our meetings that we have weekly, everybody has to have the visual turned on. We want to see everybody in the event and get as close as we can to the real thing as possible. The big three software providers is Teams, WebEx, and Zoom. You need to make sure that if you're going to be running an event or you're going to be hosting something from your home, you need to assure your connectivity. So you need to make sure that internet connection is solid. Okay. You need to utilize all the options, but master just one. In our world, this meeting is on a Zoom. We've decided probably sometime around March or April last year that Teams was the best for us. So our people have mastered Teams, but we know how to work in WebEx and Zoom because that might be what a supplier or a client might require. You need to learn, as I am talking to you, as if you were sitting right in front of me. I actually try to visualize the fact that I'm not really talking to a computer, but I'm talking to a room that's filled with people in it and so forth. And you need to practice this, and you need to sound and exemplify a level of confidence. So companies are also impacted in relative to their sales operations. Appreciate the fact that most business sales are done on an eyeball-to-eyeball basis with physical salespeople making calls on companies. That came to a very quick halt by the middle of March of last year. For the most part, it's still being halted, though there are certain areas of the country and certain verticals where it's starting to open up. So people have learned to sell electronically. Appreciate the fact that there's reduced or no in-person. The business models are changing also for procurement, which a lot of people on the call here are on. And we need to understand that we need to have value adds, responsiveness, price, and deliverables are critical factors. So we make a few recommendations here. Is one that we need to be flexible, creative, a willingness to explore new options. We have to focus on differentiation. We have to create opportunity to heavily mine, which is to create information flows into us on our competition, the contemporary offerings that are out there, and new client needs. And we need to be creating opportunities and new modes of contact, communications, and business development options. We need to be able to add value. COVID-19 relief assistance, as an example. I have a client that's in Buffalo, New York. They're a computer parts distributor. They, through the COVID now, has actually offered a service where they've hired a number of technicians in their geographic area. And not only will they send the part to the client, but they'll send somebody to actually install it. They've made it in safe circumstances. So the person is wearing a mask, the person has gloves on, has been immunized and so forth before they come in and so forth. So it's a value add, and their business is picked up dramatically as a result. Um, Payment terms, being conscious of the fact that some companies' cash flow has been extremely limited in this pandemic timeframe. So allowing longer terms for companies to pay is also considered a value add. We have a client that's in the Baltimore area. That's a hardware reseller. They provide technical assistance at home. So they created a 24-hour, 7-day, 800 hotline, and also a chat box through the internet so that people could come in to find out how to install the hardware, or if they're having a problem with the hardware performing or working, that they can call that number to get help and so forth, which has been very great because a lot of people working from home actually now have to manage the equipment as compared to having people in their office who could handle that problem for them. So other things to think about, additional considerations, identify what the needs are, necessary deliverables are now in procurement, trying to keep a complete focus, learn to explore, question, and survey, become a better inquirer and a better listener, and create specific strategy and tactics for sourcing, purchasing, and vendor management, which I'll share some of those with you. One is to make sure that you're doing a tremendous amount of mining, which is information gathering. I believe that people working from home actually have more time on their hands and available to them. So spending more time in information gathering is critical. To still do team-based work, SWOT analysis, as mentioned before, understanding internally what the operational needs are and being able to execute correctly. In the concept of leading, is creating a vision with the company, understanding of the difference between being passionate and empathetic, the difference between influence and leading, being inspirational, showing a high degree of integrity, systems of being responsible and accountable, and lastly, being persuasive but substantively. In purchasing and supply chain, even though the on-person, eyeball-to-eyeball relationship is difficult, you still want to try to maintain as good a relationship as you can in a remote concept. Attend virtual industry trade association meetings. Most trade groups are still meeting, even though they're done virtually. I would say that virtually doesn't work as well as in person, but it does still provide some ability to keep relationships going. When you can meet and greet off-site at a Starbucks or wherever, do it. Utilize web-based visual platforms. Due diligence is raised even more so now when you're not able to meet eyeball to eyeball. What value and add can they provide relative to dealing with the issues around the pandemic and the recovery? And one of the suggestions that we make is running vendor fairs. We've been very successful with a number of our larger clients in their supply base is actually running a vendor fair. It's kind of like a reverse trade show where you invite vendors in a format where they can have time allotted for them to show you their products and their services all over maybe a 2 or 3 day period, depending upon the size and scope of the vendor fair. The vendor fairs can be accomplished virtually. They can be run for 1 to 2 day events. We identify the list of current and potential vendors. We send out invites to them. We allow time for the interface to take place, questions and dialogue. We show to them that we appreciate them being a vendor or supplier or a potential vendor and supplier to us. And then it allows us to schedule the next step, which might be transferring samples or developing a contract or some basis of how best to move forward. At a lot of these fairs, we invite the internal stakeholders. We can schedule it by product or service line or silo in your company. We identify specific control and format the timeline. We want to determine who the invited people should be. We make contact, email, dialogue, email, and we structure a format and a schedule. The virtual vendor fair keeps vendors interested. It creates a focused event with tremendous information and vetting. It assists in time management and it demonstrates internally the leadership that you're showing at a time of this problem. A lot of us tier our suppliers and vendors. We're a big proponent of making sure that we are prioritizing our activity with our tier one suppliers. So we line them all up for a 90-minute conference call. We let them know how the company is doing through the pandemic, announce any future business plans for 2021, discuss impacts to procurement, and will be favorably received as a proactive leadership event by you and your company. Other things that we think about relative to the pandemic and our business responsibilities is social distancing, masks, smaller groups, testing requirements, having controls over visitor management. I'm very turned off when a company has set up where there are no visitors allowed whatsoever as compared to those that have visitors, but they have guidelines and restrictions on what they need to do and what they can do in order to get in. Meeting participation, dealing with symptom management, just having a device that takes their temperature before they come in and completing a form, asking 4 or 5 basic questions is what we're referring to. And whether or not you're going to have a vaccination policy, to what extent you're going to enforce it relative to your employees, as well as your vendors and suppliers. So in summary, working from home is clearly a challenge, but that challenge can be managed successfully. It requires discipline. It requires this accountability and responsibility in all the areas that I talked about, and requires a high degree of leadership in how you approach the subject matter. So with that, I appreciate your kind attention. I wish for all of you to be well, healthy, and safe. And if anyone has a question now, you're more than welcome to ask it.
Okay, we do have a comment from Lonnie. Let me just get that. Okay. Hi, Tom. Great presentation on things we didn't think about. What is your position on using the software tools out there that track an employee's work while being remote?
I'm a big fan of accountability and responsibility with people in general. And I've always had an Excel spreadsheet to follow my employees' responsibilities. And we have on that Excel spreadsheet all the things that they're responsible to do, and a column which gives the status, and the next column which gives next steps. And I think that since the pandemic that's becoming even a more important necessary tool for companies when people are not visually in front of them. So there are a lot of software programs now that provide different venues to accomplish that. So I would say to you that I'm a big fan of it. And I believe in this basic premise that people rise to the level you hold them accountable and responsible. Okay. In my own theory, 3% of the workforce will be accountable and responsible, and you don't need to be concerned about them. But the other 97%, you're going to have to stay on top of. And if you stay on top of them, then they'll do what they need to do independently. So the answer is yes. Whatever you can use to help people be as accountable and responsible, and those tracking documents, I would highly recommend.
Thanks, Tom. I have a question for you. As far as the remote office in your house, are there special things that you think makes a more efficient office space, especially if you're going to be talking to customers?
Um, First of all, you have to have what I believe is a defined space, okay? And a space that can actually be segregated with a door, meaning that you can go into the space and shut a door. I know a lot of people who might live in apartments and condos that might be a little bit more difficult, or a small home might be more difficult, but if it's possible, to have a segregated area. I have a client that works out of their bedroom, but they've actually built temporary walls in the corner of that bedroom using folding devices so that they can have privacy from the rest of the bedroom. I think that having the ability so that you can have a private call without the sounds of the home or the neighborhood coming in is critical. And having a degree of privacy like you would in your cubicle or in your office when you're in your office. So I think they have to be there. And I'm a big proponent of the company supplying all the necessary equipment that you would have access to in the office. And then also, as I discussed, making sure that the cybersecurity that they have in their office is extended to your equipment and what you're doing in that office space. The idea is segregation so that while things are happening in your house, whether it's children, grandchildren, spouses, dogs, cats, neighbors ringing bell, whatever, that those things are isolated from the space that you're working in.
Do you think you have to do anything with the background? So say you're on a team meeting, and does it matter what's behind you that people are going to see? That's one
We,
of
we,
my questions.
we actually debate that a lot in our own meetings all the time. I have in my office. My office is in a solarium in the house, so I have all these plants and fish tanks and stuff in the background. For those that are looking, that's what I have. And to me, that makes it more interesting. But I do have some clients that have very strong policies, and they have specific backgrounds that their people use that put out the name of the company or their logo or their trademarks and so forth like that. I think that's more of a personal thing. Kathy, I think that, you've got to do what you're comfortable with and so forth. But I think you have to be sensitive to the fact that you don't want a background that is offensive or that's making a statement that might be political in nature and so forth. I attended a webinar that was run by a company in the South, and the gentleman who was running the event had a Confederate flag in his background. And while that doesn't necessarily bother me, I found out afterwards that there were a few people who were offended by that. So I think you have to be sensitive to those type of things. So my bottom line is it should be a personal thing, and to make it so it's appropriate and not to be offensive.
Thank you very much. Okay, I don't see any more questions in the chat or in the Q&A. So at this time, I'd like to thank you, Tom, for a very informative presentation. It was packed with so much information, and as Lonnie said, a lot of items we probably really weren't thinking about initially. We will have this program available for you on our YouTube channel, probably later today or tomorrow. And I will be sending out an email with your CEU and also the link to the recording and also Tom's presentation itself. Just a quick reminder to register for our next program, which will be on next week, actually, May 13th. At this time, I'd like to wish everybody a wonderful afternoon, and thank you again for joining us.